Well, hello guys. I'm your host, Elsa Kurt, and today I have Mike Barron with me. He is he's kind of a big deal, guys. I found him on Wikipedia. What? What? You're a big deal. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Good.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. So you're a comic book writer. You are also an author. You have like 15 novels. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, you're super prolific, crazy talented. And I have to be honest, I have no background knowledge reading of comic books. So I had to defer, as you already kind of know, I had to defer to my husband, like, okay, can you read this? Because Mike was so great to send me a copy of Thin Blue Line, which is, it's incredible. It really is. And you don't have to be a comic book fan to realize the greatness at work there. So
Thank you.
No, thank you. Really, really. And I really want to get into that specific comic book, but I want to talk first about your background. Now, you've been in this business since like the 80s. Is that about right?
Well, I've been a professional writer since 1971. My first job out of college was smoking marijuana for the government. I went to Boston because I heard there were these alternative newspapers who would hire anybody who could string two words together. And there was an ad in the back of the Boston Phoenix, wanted volunteers to participate in a Harvard NIMH study of the effects of marijuana. So I lived on a hospital ward with 11 other guys for a month, and we smoked dope every day and took a battery of tests. It was just like college. College had prepared me for this job. And when I got out, I wrote it up and I sold it to the Boston Phoenix. And soon I was writing for them regularly, and I eventually became their music editor.
Wow, that's incredible. That alone is an incredible story. So you must have gotten a lot of writing material out of that experience, like a wealth.
Well, it was my dream job. They would send me out night after night to go to the clubs to listen to the music and interview musicians. And I've always been a music nut. I still am. We've been going out 2 or 3 nights a week here in Fort Collins to see live music.
That's awesome. You must have missed it as much as we did during the whole pandemic that was going. Sorry, guys. Slip of the tongue. Yeah, it was really rough. We're big music buffs as well. My husband plays drums, and he's in a couple bands. And yeah, we were out watching music all the time. So it's great to be back doing that again. So tell me a little bit about how you got started in the comic book writing industry.
I was working at an insurance company in Madison when I got a phone call from a local editor I knew. And he said, there's some guy down here trying to sell us his artwork, and you should take a look at it. And he gave me Steve Rude's phone number. So I called the dude, and we agreed to meet on the steps of the student union. And he opened up his portfolio, and I was blown away. And I said, well, dude, what do you want to do? He says, I want to do comics, but I can't write. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to do comics, but I can't draw. And we were in the right place at the right time. In the capital city distribution, the second largest distributor of comic books in the world was looking to publish their own books. So I went home and I brainstormed the first 12 pages of Nexus. I drew them out by hand. I'm not a good artist, but I'm good enough so that anybody can see what I'm drawing and understand it. And it was every page and all the word balloons and everything you needed. And then I gave that to Steve Rude, and he penciled, inked, and lettered it. And we showed it to the boys, and they said, yeah, now we need 20 more pages. And we were off and running. They only lasted about 8 issues at Capitol before they sold the imprint to First Comics. And I was with First for over 10 years, also with the Badger, which is my Wisconsin creation. And then Dark Horse bought the rights to Nexus from First, and in an unprecedented act of generosity, which I don't think has ever been repeated, Mike Richardson, the publisher, returned the copyright and trademark to Steve Rude and I. So we're still producing Nexus now. In fact, I have 2 graphic novels coming out from Dark Horse next year. I don't own the Badger. Badger fans are clamoring for more material. And I will get it out there. But unfortunately, the guy that owns the Badger is he's a little asleep at the switch.
Yeah. So the comic book world is its own universe. It's its own, that the following for the comic books, it's just this whole lane that if you're not in it, if you don't understand it, it's baffling to outsiders, really. My husband, I told you, he's a lifelong comic book collector. I was talking just before our interview, I was talking to him about you and our interview. And I said, what are some things you would want to know as and of course he wouldn't stop talking. He kept going on and he had like a million questions for you. And I think he's pretty jealous that I get to talk to you and he doesn't right now. But I said to him, I was telling him how far your career has spanned back. And he's like, oh, I could guarantee that I have some of his work. I would guarantee that, in his collections, he's got your work, which to me is so wild, so crazy. Were you always a comic book fan? Like, would you grow up reading comic books?
Yeah, I did. I grew up in Mitchell, South Dakota. What really got me hooked were Uncle Scrooge comics from Disney. Because the man who created them, Carl Barks, was a genius. And if you want to study how to become a comic book guy, you can do no better than to read the Uncle Scrooge comics. There's not a wasted frame. There's not a wasted picture or word in any of them. He knew how to construct a story. He was just brilliant.
Yeah. I know for pretty certain I couldn't write for a comic because, that's a huge skill. It's a tremendous skill to be able to convey so much with so little. You get these, like you said, you got these little, text bubbles, and you are telling a story through these pictures and these tiny dialogue, basically, and sound effects going on. And, and like I said, I read Thin Blue Line, the comic that you sent me, and I was blown away. Because I went in thinking, oh, this isn't going to be like a story. Like, I'm not going to get depth out of this, but there was tremendous depth to it and nuance. And I think that is probably a really underrated skill to be able to do that. Did that come naturally for you?
I always felt that I could write comics. And the first comic I created, Nexus, became an industry hit, one of the most praised comics ever. And I owe my career to that. And my first publisher, Milton Grebe, because on the strength of that in Badger, I started to work for Marvel and DC. I wrote Punisher for 5 years. I wrote The Flash, Star Wars, Deadman, many other characters. But I've always preferred my own characters. But it's also been a learning process. Comics are the most forgiving medium there are. You can get away with stuff in comics that you couldn't in any other medium. Just look at Superman in 1939. It took 40 years for the movies to catch up and portray Superman in his semi-convincing style. Now, thanks to CGI, they can show anything. But you also there's Theodore Sturgeon was a great science fiction writer, and he created Sturgeon's Law. And Sturgeon's Law is 90% of everything is crap. And that's true. And it applies across the arts, and that's certainly true of comics. And it's certainly true of mainstream comics now, which are dying because of woke content. And it's just they forgot their first job, which is to entertain. And I never lose sight of that fact. I know it's my job to entertain, but a lot of it is just stuff I've learned over the years. And one of the encouraging things about my life is I feel I'm getting better as a writer. For instance, it took me 30 years to learn how to write a novel, because I'm a slow learner. But when I get it, I get it. And now I'm turning out 2 to 3 a year. And that's not a lot. It's not a lot, believe me. I have friends who regularly turn out 500,000 to 1 million words a year. Or 5 novels, 5 novels is no big deal for them. They have a discipline I lack. But I do write every morning, and lately the comic books have been much more rewarding financially than the novels. But I love the novels, and I have 2 that I've completed, and we're about to submit, and I'm working on 3 of my own.
Now, you said that you prefer creating your own comics versus working for the big
Absolutely.
corporations, the big guys, Marvel, of course.
Yeah.
Even I know Marvel and DC, of course. Tell me how much those entities have changed. You mentioned the wokeism, and I think that's probably, of the two biggest change in my imaginings. It would be the wokeism, and the technology would probably be the two massive changes in the industry. Is that accurate?
Yes. When I worked for the big two, my editors were experienced writers who've been around for many years. But since I left, it seems to me that they're hiring people fresh out of the colleges who have no experience writing or telling stories. And the choices they've made for their characters are inexplicable to me. DC, for example, has made virtually every character gay or bisexual, and they focus the stories around that fact. And it's just not entertaining. If they were entertaining, that would be one thing, but they're not. They're just like bumper stickers.
Sure.
We call them the liberal bumper sticker. It's a marker you throw down in the road and say, this is how I roll. You don't have to explain it. And you don't have to entertain people. And they're not entertaining people. And the sales are in the toilet. And there's been speculation for years that they're going to stop publishing these characters altogether, or else farm them out to smaller publishers.
Yeah, they went from storytelling to virtue signaling, basically, right? Yeah. And I think you made a really important distinction there, that if the stories were entertaining, if they were good stories, then so be it. But the stories aren't good. And that's what the problem is. They're busy, like we said, preaching wokeism and virtue signaling, and they're projecting their ideologies on people who just want a good story. Like, we just want a great story. We want to be entertained. And I agree with you so much that is so what's lacking in the industry now, that nobody cares about entertaining anymore and storytelling. They just care about ideologies and pushing narratives and all of those things. And so all of this makes you a little bit of like an anomaly in this lane, right? I mean, because,
Well, yes and no. Because of this huge rift, the comics world has been split right down the middle. I'm part of a group called Comicsgate, which are established comic book professionals who have left the industry in disgust. And we are now publishing our own material. As you know, Thin Blue Line, we self-published, and we just launched a campaign for Private American, and we hit our initial funding goal on the first day, which is very important. But we'll get into that later. Some of these characters that are in Comicsgate is led by Ethan Van Sciver, who used to draw Green Lantern. He's an awesome artist. It includes Graham Nolan, who's the co-creator of Bane, who's Batman's major villain these days, and Art T. Bear, Andy Smith, Aaron Lopresti. These are all people that have worked for the big two and could get a job there in a minute, except now that they have come out as conservatives, they need not apply. And I've been saying this for years, but being a conservative in the arts is a little like being a Nazi, like being a Jew in Nazi Germany.
I experience it in my own lane, in my small version of that, the minute they hear the word conservative or conservative leaning or, anything along those lines, it's an automatic, oh, no, thank you. And that's, I'm being polite as to what the actual response is.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we submitted Thin Blue Line to every major publisher. We knew they were going to refuse it. And we did it because we knew how they would respond. How did they respond? Like spoiled children. I can't tell you what they wrote us because it's obscene. But then we use that and say, we submitted to every major publisher, and this is the response we got. And it helped us.
Right.
Because there's a huge audience out there that just wants to be entertained. They don't want to be lectured.
With the Thin Blue Line, that is sending a very strong message, I think, and a really important one. And I think in that story, in that comic, there's a tremendous amount of balance that you actually have in there. And there's, subtle things that I noticed that, that you had one character, 3J's, that, was not maybe at some point in time the best cop, are doing
A
the
little
best
shady.
things. Yeah. And I thought, when I read that, I said, you know what, I think that was important to put in there. And I think because it's an acknowledgement that, we know that there isn't such thing as, every single cop being good. They're human beings. They have faults, they have flaws, and they may not represent the badge well. It's an acknowledgement of all of the things, I thought, and it was just so tremendously well balanced, I thought.
Well, thank you.
No, thank you so much for creating something like that. Did your team, the people that you worked with, was everybody on board right away? Were they like, yeah, no, let's do
Yes,
this? Or
my artist, Joseph Arnold, is a full-time police officer.
oh, wow,
And he still managed to produce the book faster than many professionals.
it's incredible. Are there going to be more in that series?
Yes, in fact, I just finished writing the second one. I didn't expect this to happen when I conceived it. The demand was so overwhelming. We decided we should do a follow-up. I'm really excited about this follow-up. I can't tell you what it's about, but the title will give you a clue. It's called The Revolving Door.
Ah, oh boy. Oh, that's going to be good. Yes, that's going to be amazing. By the way, my husband yelled at me for taking the comic out of the sleeve. He's like, be careful.
How it is ruined.
I literally was he's like, why did I said, because like, how am I going to look at it? Otherwise I want to read it. He's like, all right, just make sure your hands are clean. Wow. What do you have a favorite comic that you've written or that you've worked on? Are there favorites? Can you
When I do
favorites?
a good script and it turns out well, I'm very proud of it.
Yeah.
But less people think that my stuff is political. It's not, for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Thin Blue Line was, and Private American is, and the next Thin Blue Line will be. But most of my projects are just for pure entertainment, like
Florida Man. I love that. That's just the name alone makes me chuckle. I love
pretty
it.
funny. It's based on my novels. I've written 3 Florida Man novels, and when I was done, I realized I had a very detailed outline. I mean, 3. Yeah, I started as a comic book, and I wrote 5 scripts.
Mm.
And when I was done, I realized I had a very detailed outline for a novel. So I wrote the novel, and I sent it to my publisher, Wolfpack, which mainly does Westerns and men's adventure novels, and they snapped it up. And now there are 3 Florida Man novels out, and I'm working on the 4th.
That's awesome. Who can resist a Florida Man story? Who?
It'll make you laugh out loud.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. We need laughter, right? More than anything in the world, we need laughter right now to get through all of the insanity. I'm curious about like the actual process of creating a comic. So do you write out like a full length story and then break it down into small pieces? Or do you just, you've done this for so long, you probably could just go right to script and do dialogue? And how does it work?
Sometimes, in fact, when I first began writing comics, as I told you, I would draw each page out by hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not outline, but I had in the back of my head the structure of a dramatic story. A story is a dynamic narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end. So it goes like this, the hero's up, the hero's down. There's got to be constant change. And the reader has to care about the characters before he'll turn the page, because the most important question in all fiction is what happens next. Mm-hmm. And you have to make the reader care to turn the page. Well, how do you do that? There are a million ways. But getting back to what I was doing with Nexus, I would start with an opening panel. And I think, well, what's compelling? What will attract the reader's attention? And then I would draw that panel, and then I would think, well, what happens next? What's the logical extension of this panel? So I would work my way through the whole comic like an inchworm, going panel by panel, but always with this dramatic structure in the back of my head. And this was an invaluable exercise for me. And anybody who wants to do comics, I would recommend that they do this, whether they can draw or not. Just use stick figures, because it teaches you so many things. It teaches you how much weight a page can carry. It teaches you about story dynamics, because you'll read a comic which has 6 panels of people talking, and then it'll have 2 or 3 page panels, or two or three panel pages where the action opens up. And when the action really opens up, then you might go to a full page spread. I hate to do that because the action stops dead when you come to a full page image. So I usually devote the top 2/3 of the page to the image and the bottom to a horizontal panel that carries the story on to get the reader to turn the page. The most important question in all fiction is what happens next.
Yes, absolutely. That's so incredible to me and so fascinating, the actual process, the science of putting together a comic. And, I love the structure of it. That fascinates me. It makes perfect sense too. You have all of the elements of a story happening in this incredibly condensed form. So, and it's so impactful. And I will tell you, I did get invested in these characters in Thin Blue Line. I was invested. And at the end, I'm a little bit embarrassed to tell you, I got a little emotional. I got a little choked up because it's so real as to what we're living with and what we're dealing with and what we're witnessing. And, I won't give anything away about it because people need to read it. But yes, you get invested in these characters. And before I read that, if you'd asked me if I would get invested in comic book characters, I would say, don't be silly. No, they're cartoons. But, in my inexperienced mind for that, that's how I kind of consider. Am I going to get invested in a, cartoon character? No, you do. Were you this good early on, do you think?
I was good enough to stand head and shoulders above the crowd, and that's why we've won multiple Eisners and an Inkpot award. But as I said, one of the bright spots in my life is that I think I'm getting better as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exciting because I get up in the morning and I look forward to writing, although sometimes it's a real challenge.
Sure.
Like Florida Man. The challenge with Florida Man is to create the most impossible, humiliating situation for my protagonist that I can imagine. And he kind of staggers from disaster to disaster. And right now, I'm holding fire until I can think of the next development.
Mm-hmm. I love that. How long does it take you? So for a comic beginning to end, is there a specific time frame that you try and keep in, or it just goes organically?
When I'm on fire and it's organic, I can write 10 to 12 pages a day. Now, most standard comics in my mind are 24 pages a story, but that varies. It can go from 20 to 22 to 24. I like mm-hmm. 24. But the new Thin Blue Line is over 60 pages, and it's taken me a couple of weeks to write.
Okay. Is that an average? Is there an average page number for comic books?
Yes, there is an industry standard, and whenever they're in trouble, they start shrinking the page numbers to save money. And now they're hiring people who have no business in comics, mm-hmm. And they're probably paying them less than what I was getting paid 35 years ago. And they're using a lot of foreign artists. Now, many of these foreign artists are outstanding. Some aren't, but they're also using domestic artists who will do anything to break into comics. Mm-hmm. They want to make comics in the worst way possible. And they do.
And they do. Now, digital art versus good old fashioned hand drawn. Is anybody doing hand drawn anymore, or is that the predominant?
Mostly artists with whom I work are doing hand drawn, but many are doing digital too. Mm-hmm. You can't tell the difference really when you see the finished product in the hands of a master.
Yeah.
Steve Rude, my partner with Nexus, is still painting every day and still does every page by hand. In fact, he still inks himself and letters himself.
Does anybody turn their nose at the digital aspect of it? If you're old school and have been doing the manual physical work of creating this art, in my mind, I compare it to somebody who just goes on a computer, which is a talent and a skill all of its own, not to diminish that as a talent or skill, but boy, what a different thing is that. Is there any kind of like snobbery, like, you know, if you compare it to traditionally published versus self-published?
If there were any, in fact, it would be the reverse. And
Really?
the people who do their work on paper with pencil and ink would look down their noses at digital.
Yes.
Say, wow, but it really, the skill lies in the artist's mind and in his hand, and the proof is in the finished image.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter in a comic book unless you collect original art. And original art is very valuable depending on the book. I mean, we see pages being sold for over $100,000 where I knew the artist. And I remember those books coming out, and they just become very popular. Like Jim Lee, who is the publisher at DC now. And DC, and he was one of the founders of Image. Image is a splinter group that's now an established force in the marketplace. And Jim do a lot of important stuff. And his pages or like Frank Miller. Have you heard of Frank Miller?
I have not, but I can guarantee my husband has.
He moved on to movies with Sin City.
Okay.
And the 300. But Frank was a very vital comic book creator. He's got a unique style, and his pages are going for six figures.
What advice would you give to anyone trying to get into this industry now?
Well, first of all, I would say try drawing out your own comic by hand the way I did. It's an invaluable exercise. It helps you understand what the artist has to deal with, and it teaches you how much weight a page can carry. Other than that, writers are made, not born. You have to write every day. This is one of the most important things I can tell anybody is carry a notepad and a pen with you at all times. And that goes for artists too. And for artists, when I talk to budding artists who want to break in and they're copying out of a comic book, I say, don't do that. Draw what you see in real life. Draw what you see before you. Study life drawing. You got to master anatomy. You got to master perspective. And once you've mastered it and created an exciting style, well, then you're good to go. But the act of writing is, you just have to do it, to understand it. And when you get to a certain point, every young writer says, oh, I don't know if this is any good. I'm going to show it to my mother. I'm going to show it to a friend. But if you're good, after a while, you don't think that at all. Because I know my stuff is good.
Right.
I don't have second thoughts about it. People may not enjoy it, but other people will, because that's why I write it.
Right. Yeah, that's why they say, right, art is subjective, right? If one person's, all of the cliches, one person's trash is another person's treasure, all of those things. And I think that's such great, valuable advice to give. And it's so true, do master your craft and keep learning, I think is like tremendously important, that you can never say, well, I've learned everything there is to learn. Now I'm done. That's insane. Anybody who thinks that is out of their mind and is just, losing tremendous opportunity. So thank you for sharing that advice, because I know there's so many young artists out there that just want to do what you're doing. And that's, and I know your website, I want to talk about your website too. I saw that you have a video on there that gives a little bit of a lesson on all of that too, which I think is so gracious to do. And that's something I love about the author writer community, that I've noticed that so many of us in our lane are so more than happy to share what we know, and I think that's so cool, that the whole hand up
My
mentality.
wife, Ann, makes me do that. She says, are you ready for your video? Every Wednesday.
I love that.
And are you talking about bloodyredbaron.com or my
Yes.
YouTube channel? Because I have a YouTube channel, Mike Baron, where I mostly talk about writing.
That's awesome.
And how to do it.
That's tremendous. Give everybody where they can find, well, technically where they can find everything that you do.
Well, I'm on Twitter at Bloody Red Baron. I'm on Facebook, The Comics and Novels of Mike Baron. If you go to Amazon and you type Mike Baron, that's my pen name, you'll get 22 pages of stuff. My website is bloodyredbaron.com. And last night, as I said, we launched Private American. And it's also highly volatile story because it's about a vigilante living in Texas, a veteran, who takes the law in his own hands because the government won't do anything about this tsunami of fentanyl, terrorists, drugs, and human traffickers that's flowing across our southern border. It's what Captain America would be doing if I were writing him, and what he used to do.
Right.
With
Absolutely.
a little Punisher thrown in. And
Mhm.
the book is almost finished. It's almost finished. And that's another rarity, too, in the crowdfunding world, where people will finance a book and then take 2 years to fulfill. We don't do
Mhm.
that. We fulfill promptly. And I've done 3 crowdfunding programs so far. Thin Blue Line was by far the most successful.
Yeah, it gives you a really good idea, indication of, what people really are thinking, where their heads are really at, and not where corporate media is telling you everyone's heads are at. So it it feels good to hear things like that, that there are lots of people out there that do support and do care and believe in right over wrong and truth, actual truth, not, facts over feelings is one of my favorite things. And I love that. I want to thank you and congratulate you on such an incredible career,
Thank
and
you.
really the bravery to stand up for what you believe in and speak out and create art that does that. And it's especially vital when it goes against the norm. So I thank you tremendously for that.
And folks, if you're looking for Private American, it's on Indiegogo, or you go to theprivateamerican.com.
Outstanding. Mike, thank you so much for joining me today on the show. I appreciate it. I look forward to talking to you again in the future. I hope with some further releases, we can catch up again, and that would be amazing.
Thank you, Elsa.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, that was Mike Barron. As you can see, he is absolutely tremendous and incredible. Go check him out. We'll have all the links in the show's notes, and we will see you in the next episode. Take care, guys. Hey, family, if you're looking for the perfect gift for the reader in your life, why not check out one of my books? They're all available on Amazon and most major online book retailers, as well as elsakurt.com.